Thank you, Adam, and thanks everyone for being here. Um, my name is Gary Lin. I'm the founder and CEO of Airwork. For today's chat, I'd love to talk to you guys about how YCombinator founders build startups. And I'm aware not everyone's going to be familiar with, well, I guess both startups and YCombinator. So I'd love to kind of quickly jump in, introduce myself, and then also tell you a little bit about what a startup actually is, what YCombinator actually is, right? And then I'll dive a little bit deeper into what specifically they teach and how you can apply some of that knowledge to your own work. So just to kick it off, guys, I'm Gary. I'm Toronto-based, came out of Waterloo from I think a couple of years ago. Time moves fast, so I usually say like a year or two ago, but it's actually been a while. Graduated in 2019. I've been an engineer at Facebook, Yelp, NVIDIA, and 8, 9 other tech companies in Toronto and the Bay Area. My background is in software, and we came out of Y Combinator in winter 2022. So they do 2 batches per year. That was the first batch of last year. Out of Y Combinator, we did raise 1.5 million USD as part of our pre-seed round, just to kind of get the company started, build a team and kind of build a product out there, right? So real one sentence kind of summary of Airwork is if you've ever used Uber before, which most people on this chat probably have. It's basically if you own a business and you click a button on an app, and then instead of a taxi coming to pick you up, you get a worker to help work at your business. So we're looking at things like general laborers, skilled laborers, sometimes even electricians, delivery drivers, warehouse workers. Kind of it really ranges depending on the industry, but that's the general concept. It's shift by shift, right? So jumping into this now, what really is a startup? And honestly, it's pretty straightforward. A startup is literally it's a business that's designed to grow fast. And so a couple of common misconceptions here is that one, like a startup has to be a tech startup. No, not really. Blue Bottle Coffee, if you've ever had that, they're a startup, right? It's weird. They've raised like $120 million in funding, but it's literally a coffee shop. It just kind of blew up exponentially somehow. Um, you know, a, a, a startup isn't necessarily venture backed. There are a lot of great startups out there that have I believe, not raised like a single dollar in venture capital. You can bootstrap it. You can just kind of fund it with your own kind of capital. It doesn't necessarily have to involve outside investors. But the general aim for a startup is that it has to grow fast, and I stress that kind of greatly, right? A startup needs to be designed from the very beginning to grow quickly, and primarily the best way to do that is if you have some mechanism for exponential growth, right? Where the bigger you get, the more likely it is that the bigger you will get, if that makes sense. So yeah, but really, startup it's a business, right? What is Y Combinator? Well, Y Combinator, sometimes I like to talk about this because sometimes people have heard of it, sometimes people know intimately, sometimes people have never heard of it before. It's an accelerator for startups. There's a couple other ones, right? There's Toronto has a pretty big one. Techstars is pretty big. I think StartX over in Stanford is pretty big. Launch House was big for a while. There's a few of these. Y Combinator from my understanding, is one of the most well-known ones. They invest 500K USD into your startup, and you're given mentorship. You're given some programs access to a lot of kind of exclusive data, right? You have investor lists and ratings and reviews from other founders about investors and things like that. So they've done a lot of rounds, right? They've done 3,000 startups so far, and the big ones that you've probably heard of that came out of it are Airbnb, DoorDash, Coinbase, Dropbox, and so on and so forth. So it's 3 months, and then at the end, you get demo day where you present to a bunch of investors, kind of like what I'm doing right now, except it's only 1 minute. It's like 60 seconds. And they either decide to kind of go on and chat with potentially fundraising, or they don't. So that's a quick introduction to those two things. So what is it that YC, I'm just going to call it YC, what did they teach you about building startups? Well, there's really kind of everything. There's a lot of knowledge, by the way. Go online and look up Y Combinator Startup School. There's like pages and pages of documents there. Read some of that stuff if you're interested. There's a lot. Also, look up all of the essays by Paul Graham. A lot of YC is built off of Paul Graham's kind of knowledge because he is the founder of YC. There's some pretty good nuggets of information in some of those essays. But if I were to summarize everything I learned into the next like 6 minutes, I would say there's two big points. You got to make something people want, and you have to do it quickly. There's basically those two parts. Like that's it, right? So how do you make something people want? And every one of these words here actually matters. It's a very concise phrase, but it means a lot. There's three ways to do this. You could either solve a small problem for a lot of people, right? Google search, everybody uses. They're solving relatively smaller problems. It's like an encyclopedia, except it's online. And then Facebook, you're connecting with some of your friends. They're like, oh, it'd be nice if I could connect with that guy I met in, like this class, which is where Facebook originally started. It's a small problem for a lot of people. Or you could solve a big problem for some people. If you have a very specific kind of cancer or, that not everyone has that, but it's a big problem. And if you have a drug for that, you have a lab building drugs for rare cancers. That kind of falls under that category, right? Some of the other ones are like space travel or whatnot. And the last category is you can improve something that exists. Most startups fall somewhere along the lines of this one because Uber, taxis existed before Uber did, but they made it better, right? Hotels existed before Airbnb, but Airbnb made it easier to get yourself a unit somewhere else. And temp agencies existed before Airwork, but we're trying to make that a little bit better too. So there's the method that they stress on how to do this is you have to talk to users, build a solution to their problem, and then you repeat it because your solution is not good enough. So you just keep doing that over and over again, and eventually you somehow end up with $1 billion company. Like that's basically what happens. And it almost seems like oversimplified, but it really isn't, because so long as you found a real problem worth diving into and you have a real solution that actually works, you can basically do that, and you'll figure out ways to sell it. You'll figure out ways to get it to market. You'll figure out ways to to get enough people onboarded. And so that's basically it. That's like your primary method, right? Yes, there's lots of stuff to talk about how to, race the market. I think John will probably talk about that afterwards. But at least from YC's perspective, talking to users, that's the one thing that not nearly enough people do. Most founders, honestly, me included, like my first few tries, you have this idea like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could just rent out your parking spot to somebody else, right? And that's an actual idea. Like my girlfriend at the time, wife now, that we had and we played around with. And you just build a bunch of crazy stuff where you build this whole app, and then you go out and you talk to people and you realize nobody actually wants that. That happens quite a lot. So the first step you should do is actually talk to people, right? Actually figure out the problems and figure out that enough people have that problem. If that makes sense. Along the lines of that, the idea is that if you can make 10 people happy, like really, really happy, or 1,000 people kind of happy, you actually want that first thing. Solve a very critical problem for a small amount of people. Be very narrow with your solution set and your problem set, and then slowly expand out once you've captured 100% of that small segment of the market, and then vertically expand into horizontally expand it into the next market segment, and then the next market segment. But go 100% at a time. Right? Cool. So that's point number one. You have to make something that people want. The second point is you have to do that quickly. Whatever brilliant idea it is that you have, that you think you're going to go out to market with, the first thing, I don't know, like the first Bitcoin, or the first LLM. OpenAI wasn't the first LLM, right? Like it existed 60 years before that. There exists a larger incumbent out there that does exactly what it is that you're talking about. Your biggest advantage as a startup is that you're fast. You can be fast, at least. You're a smaller team, you're a smaller ship. You can change direction quickly. You can adjust to the market. You can adjust to feedback. A big company can't do that easily, right? That's the biggest kind of thing that you should take advantage of. And what I mean by that, and what apparently YC means by that, is when you're building a prototype to show users, you should be doing that in the order of magnitude of days, not months, not years. Um, Let me give you an example. One of the founders that came out of the YC Winter 2022 batch, like the same batch as us, his name's Adam, built Cable. Right, Cable is like it's a little bit hard to describe, but it's kind of like it's like a payment infrastructure layer that lives on top of Stripe. Um, he built the entire MVP, like a usable front end, web front end, back end documentation in 10 days. For the first 10 days of the batch, he built the entire product. And then the rest of the batch, which is 3 months long, he either fixed bugs and kind of like built things at night, and then or he talked to users and sold during the day. The guy worked like 20 hours like per day straight, right? So, but that's the idea, right? He built an entire function product and started collecting revenue on day 11. That's nuts. Like that's crazy. But that's apparently what you're supposed to be doing, and you're supposed to also talk to a lot of customers per day, right? When I say like talk to users, I mean talk to as many as you can, given your allocated calendar. It should be completely full. Talk to multiple people at once, right? Do a lot of experimentation. Get more confidence in the decisions that you're making, not just because people are telling you that that's what they want, but because there's actual usage proof, right? Show them there's proof that what a customer says is what they actually want based off the metrics that you're collecting. Um, Here's an example. I showed this at our last quarterly planning meeting. Here's a little example from Deal. I'd say one, I think somebody actually beat them now, but they're one of the fastest growing SaaS products in the market. That they also came out of YC like winter 19 or summer 19 or something like that. And they went from 1 million ARR, like annual revenue per year, to 100 million in 18 months. Like, you have any idea how insane that is? Like how like what is required for you to grow your revenue 100x in 18 months, right? That's nuts. But actually somebody else apparently beat them recently. So this chart is a little bit out of date now. But that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say move quickly. Right? The last part that's pretty critical to making that happen is to ignore everything else. So when you get into the C flight and you get into kind of the founder rules, and there's people inviting you to dinners, there's people inviting you to VC networking events. If you live in SF or LA, like there's like 6 of them in your neighborhood every day. I'm not kidding. It's actually really obnoxious. Like there's just conferences all over the place. There's this and there's that, and there's like, oh, like this is news bulletin and wants to talk. If you start putting energy into those things, you will never have enough time to do the stuff that you actually need to do. And there's only 2 things you need to do when you're early on. When I'm talking about early startups, you need to be talking to users and you need to be building, and there's nothing else that you should do. And that was a hard lesson for most of my kind of batchmates, including me, to learn. I spent a good amount of time. Like, we did a whole trip to Miami and justified it as like, oh, like it's Miami Tech Week. Like, we're going to go and talk to investors and kind of learn new things. I mean, we did actually learn a couple of things. So it was actually like, there was value to it, but honestly, it was mostly just 7 days of partying. Like it wasn't worth the most of the time. So, that's basically kind of, if you wanted to summarize all of YC down to like 10 slides, that's pretty much everything.